William Gibson's Neuromancer depicts a grim vision of the future, where megacorporations rule and giant neon-lit cities sprawl across the landscape. He totally didn't steal the idea from Blade Runner. This novel is the story of Case, a hacker who jacks into the Matrix. No, not that Matrix, but an imagined virtual reality version of the World Wide Web. In telling this noir tale of crime and corporate espionage, Gibson almost single-handedly created the genre of cyberpunk while winning all of science fiction literature's top critical awards. Those accolades, and the 6 million copies the novel has sold, would leave some people convinced this book is a classic, but we'll decide that for ourselves. So, pop open a bottle of Kirin Ichiban, watch out for that black ice, and join us in the Matrix. It's time for episode 77 of Toasting the Classics, Neuromancer. Welcome to Toasting the Classics, the podcast where we take something that people call a classic and we talk about it while we drink something inspired by the classic. In this case, we're doing a book that I chose. Oh, my name is Dave McArthur.
And my name is Clint Lanier.
We went with a book this time, and what I chose was Neuromancer by William Gibson. What do you think? Did you get it all read? You're good? Have you read this before?
Yeah, I've read it before. I'm good. We read it. It was exactly as I remembered it.
Okay.
Book came out in 1984, I think.
Yeah,
right?
That's right. 1984.
It didn't come out to much fanfare, but it's since become kind of a huge success. I think it sold a little bit more than my most recent book. It's about 6.5 million, just a smudging above.
Just about 6.4 million more or something.
I would say 6.4 something.
Yeah.
Subtract 100 maybe.
Couple digits, but yeah.
Right, but so it's become an alleged classic in the sci-fi genre.
Right.
What is it known for? Why is it such a big deal, according to people who think they know more than us?
Well, one thing that it's known for, if nothing else, and I saw it referred to as little fanfare as well. I saw that noted many times when talking about the release of this book, and I'm guessing that means not a lot of distribution, not a lot of advertising, and maybe not a lot of sales right away. But this book was huge when it came out critically, because it won the Triple Crown of science fiction writing, which is to win the Hugo, Nebula, and Philip K. Dick all in the same year. And I think those awards come out. They're not like awarded 10 years later or something. I think they're given.
Yeah, they're given at the time. But
in 1980.
You say critically, sci-fi critics are different than, we'll say, pop literature and so forth. I mean, this isn't going to end up on Oprah's list or anything like that.
So it's before the days when everybody would figure a successful fantasy or science fiction novel today, you'd have people immediately clamoring for the book and TV rights, like the day the book came out, because there's billions of dollars in that today, and people have recognized that. In 1984, despite the success of things like Star Wars, that just wasn't the case. You weren't looking to translate fantasy and sci-fi works immediately into big blockbuster, Game of Thrones. Probably Game of Thrones is the thing that really did that. Took something that was fantasy and really made a ton of money off of it. Maybe I'm not remembering something else that was before that, but Harry Potter, I guess, but that was always broader.
Yeah.
It always had a more broad appeal than George Martin, or at least at the time it did.
I think there's like Hunger Games, Maze Runner. There are a lot of these.
Lord of the Rings. When Lord of the Rings finally became a successful movie, might be the time when that was like, okay, we can take these books and we can make money off of them.
Yeah.
Because people had tried things like that before and they were sort of successful, but not, I don't know.
Right.
Like, for instance, this one's been in, it sounds like a kind of development hell for decades.
Yeah.
Not getting made.
It's never, it hasn't been made at all. Do you want to recap the story for us, for those?
A lot of the things we talk about with this book are going to be things that seem like they've appeared in a million other things, but this is the first place they were done. This book is the story of a professional hacker living in Japan when the book starts, because he's run into a bunch of trouble doing his job back in the States in what they call the BAMA sprawl, the Boston Atlanta Metropolitan Authority, something like that. I don't know what BAMA, I can't remember what BAMA stands for. Confusing that BAMA is where he lives, and that's also the name of a state. That threw me off the first couple of times I read it. So he's living in Japan, kind of in exile in a way, because he doesn't have his skills anymore, and he gets mixed up in a caper. And I'm going to admit to you right now, and I had this problem when I've read noir detective novels as well, I had trouble following the plot and what was going on in the capers that he was involved with. But essentially, it's a lot like a book like The Big Sleep or something. There's a whole bunch of shadowy figures behind everything that's going on. There's a femme fatale that he gets involved with. They go on this jet-setting adventure all around the world and then eventually up into space that leads to uncovering the fact that the movers and shakers of the plot are AI, multiple different AI, bad guys who are the authorities who are supposed to control the AI, and then other bad guys that are the Yakuza, and then other bad guys that are corporations. So it's basically lots of shadowy figures and organizations, all represented by a wasp hive that he destroys with fire. That's probably the most punk rock image in the whole book. In terms of this being cyberpunk, the idea of his deepest dream being to set fire and destroy these, like, you know, corporate fascist, overly intricated organizations is a very punk rock impulse, I thought. Otherwise, it's a noir that's set in a cyber future.
Which in a big way it sort of is. I mean, there's a interview with William Gibson, and he said that he saw Blade Runner, which came out, I think, in 82 or 83. And he was like, 82, oh, man. Yeah, he's like, nobody's going to believe my story is original. Everybody's going to think I'm just ripping it off of this, right? So it's not new. You know, his film noir is not new. Tech noir, remember we talked about tech noir in, where was that? We brought up tech noir.
Tech noir was in Terminator. There was the club.
It was in Terminator, right. Called tech noir. So, I mean, there was arguably Blade Runner was maybe the first of that kind of genre.
In film, it's probably not, Blade Runner is probably not the first thing, but boy, is it must have hit people like a lightning bolt at the time in terms of what it depicts compared to what had been seen before. Is really nothing like Blade Runner before Blade Runner.
Right.
Except probably the way people felt when they saw they saw that movie Metropolis, like back in the 1920s or something like that. Like, you know, something like that, like really imagining like a future, and just probably the big influence on Blade Runner. Now that just came out of my head without me thinking it through, it probably was very similar and probably inspired
but I think,
Blade Runner.
When did Akira come out?
Akira the film was, so the manga Akira, I think, is in the late 80s, and then the film is not long after that. I think maybe like 87, 88, 89 for all three of those things, both of those things to come out.
I want to think that you know, this dystopian future goes back far beyond that. There's
unquestionably dystopia unquestionionly does. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, there's Omega. Are you familiar with the movie Omega Man? I think it was a book before that. So it starred Charlton Heston, and it's essentially what
I was just reading a thing about that.
I think I Am Legend. I believe I Am Legend was a remake, the same author, maybe, Omega Man, and that was in the 70s. You have like Planet of the Apes, or this dystopian future.
Soylent Green. There's apparently a trilogy of dystopian Charlton Heston movies. I was just listening to a podcast where they're talking about those, because I've never seen Omega Man or Soylent Green now that I think of it, but I'm more familiar with Soylent Green. And this, you know, I don't want to, you know, spoiler alert, but it turns out it's sure. people.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that this dystopian future based on some type of unexplained war is nothing new. So I mean, Gibson didn't. No. And I don't mean to put him down, but he didn't. He was taking ingredients that were sort of already there, and he was putting. And I think he sort of goes down as the inventor of cyberpunk, not tech noir and not sci-fi noir or something, but this idea of cyberpunk. It's a dystopian future, and you have this class of people who are kind of this hybrid of technology and humans. It's this sort of interplay between them, sort of where they exist, how technology and humans exist. Because that's something that Blade Runner really, I mean, it does sort of, it discusses that when it talks about the androids and you know, how they are human-like, and what does it mean to be a human?
Right.
Shoving the nail through his hand, and he's got the pigeon on, you know, or dove rather. So, I mean, it's what does it mean to be human? And this is sort of what does it mean to be human in our current time when we meld with technology. Or Molly, for example, the femme fatale, they call her a razor girl. So she's got, you know, these razor blades that come out from under her fingernails, and she's got mirrored eyes, and she's got superhuman ability and all this other stuff because she's had all these enhancements, right?
Right.
You've got this drug guy, Riviera, who could project stuff that's really weird stuff, make holograms. I mean, so you've got everybody is like somehow they're cyborgs. They're a meld of human and so that's what cyberpunk is. It's like it's a natural state, right? People don't even question it at that time.
Yeah, I
So
think there are different types of brilliance with some of these things that really pave the way in imaginative literature. And what I always use is like the archetype, what I'm talking about is Star Wars. There's nothing new in Star Wars. It's just,
right,
it's a
right.
whole bunch of cool things from different places brought together into one thing that works as a whole.
Mhm.
There's nothing new per se in this. This
Mhm.
may be the first time some people have read about some of the elements that are thrown into this thing, but none of them are brand new. I was looking at sort of the history of cyberpunk, and William Gibson actually coined the term cyberspace. So
Right,
cyberpunk, it's
right.
pretty fair to say it does kind of start with him, but
Yeah.
there's elements like being able to get onto a world wide web through like an attachment in your brain that go back into the 60s. People were imagining things like that. There's this
Yeah,
author,
sure.
Samuel Delaney, that's supposed to be a precursor to William Gibson. And I tried to read one of his books one time, and it was like one of those things you try to read and it's an actual work of genius because I couldn't understand what was happening. I found it
Right.
off-putting in a lot of ways. And I was just like, oh
Mhm.
man, like I think sometimes real imaginative geniuses are like a little hard to put up with, when you're reading
Mhm.
stuff. And I was just like, I don't know if I can, man, I don't know if I can get through this book. This is rough.
Yeah.
But anyway, there's ideas like this that go before this. And there's a group of people, a group of authors that sort of directly led to William Gibson is writing. It brings the things all together into one whole in a
Mhm.
way that not a lot of, it's sort of like Lord of the Rings is the same sort of thing. There's nothing new in Lord of the Rings. It brings together a bunch of things from different sources of inspiration and creates a whole. And the world ends up being, I think, maybe what attracts people to it. Because there's a lot of works that are sort of inspired by the sort of world that William Gibson is building here. Yeah. So one of the things I was having some trouble with, and I've read a couple of other William Gibson books, things I found like on the, dollar rack at a used bookstore or something. I read
Mhm.
like 3 or 4 of his novels. I've just never read this one before.
Mhm.
And they're
Mhm.
all very much the same, and they're all very much the same in the prose style. I think the appeal to these books a lot of the time is kind of being immersed in what is going on here and trying to figure out all the different little Japanese terms and things that are getting thrown around and
Mhm.
stuff from all over the world. And
Mhm.
it's very postmodern. There's a whole bunch of different things going on,
Yeah.
and that can be attractive. But as for the prose, I found it really difficult to get through. I don't know if you felt
Yeah.
that way too. Who was the author it's Ray Bradbury, right?
Bradbury's, yeah, Fahrenheit
Yeah.
451. This is nothing compared to that one. Gibson does have a style. I like postmodern. I like the way you put that. That's a probably, and it would fit the times. This has one of the most famous opening lines of any book. This is how the book opens. The sky above the port was the color of television, tuned to a dead channel. I mean, that's great. Now, granted, kids today won't know what the heck that means,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you know,
I don't know if
the
I don't know if your
the
version had the Neil Gaiman quote, but he was talking about how if you wrote that today, a kid would read that and they would say blue. The sky was
yeah, blue,
blue
yeah,
because
yeah. The sky was
my TV
blue.
is dead.
Yeah,
It's blue.
yeah, right.
So,
Not
and then that's
gray
probably
fuzz,
not true
but
today either because now we have home screens on our smart TVs. You just have a home
yeah,
screen, so there is no dead
yeah,
channel. So it's
right. It's just we have revolving pictures of our kids on vacation. Is what the dead channel would be. So,
yeah,
um,
yeah. There you
but
go.
yeah. So he writes a lot of metaphors, a lot of analogies. But there is something to what you said. Like he'll jump in the middle of something as if the reader is expected to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
That, oh, so and so is a razor girl, without really this, girl is, and maybe eventually you figure it out along the way. Certain things mean, and figure it out not through exposition though. It's you figure it out through the action. Sort of what's happening. There was a war. You don't know what year this is. It's like in the
No,
2020s, I think.
no, we
Um,
know it's after there's one date in the whole book, and it says something about the treaties that govern AI, and it says they
hmm,
were from 53.
okay,
And that's
so
it.
whatever
I don't
that
know
means.
whether it's 50
Yeah,
years after that treaty or what, but I know it's at
yeah.
least after 2053. And I
And
don't,
and I think there was a war, kind of like Kira.
uh-huh.
There was a war at one time,
Yeah.
and you don't really know much about that. I mean, so you don't really know the history of where he's at. You don't know. You just it's kind of like you're plopped into this world. You have no idea, so you kind of have to learn as you go along.
Hmm.
And it can be a bit frustrating, I think, but I think it's a very postmodern move. It's like you
Yeah, I
just
think
got to
so.
go along with it, type of thing.
The modern world is big and multifaceted and confusing, and therefore the
Mhm.
future is probably even more like that.
Yeah.
So let's just throw you in there and give you that sense, that disorientation that would come with being in this future. And that's fun. There really is. I'm looking back, I'm flipping through just now, and I'm looking, there's something also about the way the writing is that's making it difficult for me to follow the thread. There's a lot, first of all, tons of dialogue, maybe
Mhm.
not three quarters, but something like half of the book is dialogue, which breaks up the passages a little bit to me. You don't get a narrator's voice as much in your head. It's hard to hear what's happening for me. There's a lot of offsets with commas in the sentences and things like that.
Right.
There's these long sentences with offsets by commas that are just facts that should, to me, be a separate sentence. Maybe it's just something about the prose that I'm having a little bit of difficulty with.
Well, he
There's
was
also
Canadian,
he's kind of Canadian. It's actually funny. He grew up in Virginia, down
right?
in
And then,
Southern Virginia. It's
yeah.
really weird coincidence that I discovered while I was reading about him was that,
Hmm.
so I went on this road trip with my friends one time. I can't remember exactly the details, but we had to go rescue my dad's car from somewhere down in Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
We went down, we were coming home, and the car engine exploded. And we were by the side of the road. I went to a farmhouse and asked for like a phone. You had to use like a phone, like a phone on a wire, because nobody has a cell phone yet, to call a tow truck. Anyway, we ended up stuck overnight in this town called Witherville, Virginia. And I was with my friends, and we ended up playing that. I had the books with me for some reason. We ended up playing this cyberpunk role-playing game called Shadowrun. And
Hmm.
that's what I did that night. Then we got the car back the next day and drove home. And then I'm reading this and I'm like, so the creator of cyberpunk as a genre was from the town where my car broke down and I played cyberpunk role play. It doesn't seem like the kind of place you'd be from and be like a visionary of the future. Maybe there's something to that. I don't know. Maybe there's a reason. Because remember that guy Jaron Lanier,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
who's from Las Cruces,
Yeah. Yeah. It's just one of those coincidences, right?
who's like what was he? He's like the guy who created the term virtual reality, right?
Yep. He created yeah, the father of virtual reality. Yeah.
I feel like you could live in Mesilla and pretend that you lived in the 1800s, much less in the 20th century, the 21st century.
Right.
And he's dreaming about
Yeah.
what the deep future is like. And I'm thinking maybe there's something to that. Maybe some people who think about the future a lot don't want to live in the future. They want to live in the past. Or
He's become very outspoken against technology, against social media, and against. He wrote one book called like "You Are Not a Tool" or something like that. Another one called "Who Owns the Future." He's very much an anti. I mean, he's not a Luddite or anything, but he's probably anti AI as well.
I'm sure he's aware of the challenges it presents anyway.
Yeah. Okay, so he was not Canadian. So Gibson, he fled to Canada supposedly to dodge the draft, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
He said that wasn't quite true because the draft never really came up. He just went to Canada because that's where all the draft dodgers were going.
Right.
And he sort of wanted to be close to them.
It ended up in Canada. It was kind of like, I remember my stepdad used to always talk about, he went to a protest and he burned his draft card when he was at the protest. And I was like, yeah, but you can't use your left hand. You would have been 4F. And he was like, well, yeah, I know. It was a symbolic protest.
Right.
That was,
but it was a protest all the same. So the girls are still digging it.
Well, let's get
what
out
did you think? What did too much? Oh, okay, yeah. Let's do that. So, what did you choose for us?
So, what I chose for the drink was a directly reference, and I think it might have even been on the first page of the book, Kirin beer, which is a Japanese beer. I don't know anything about it. I don't even know whether I got the right kind. I got Kirin Ichiban, which, as far as I know, means number one.
This is almost like olive oil. This is first press, 100% malt at the bottom. I was glad to see that. It's not second press.
What does that mean?
That would mean. I have no idea. Back in the day, they used to reuse the malt from beer. They'd make a strong beer out of the malt, and then they would kind of reuse it, and they'd make a weak beer. So I guess that's sort of what this means. This is the oldest beer in Japan from 1888. Also the number one selling beer in Japan. So maybe it had something to do with age, with the tradition of advertising and so forth.
This is entirely made from wheat, right? This is a wheat. I mean, like a barley, a grain. It's not made from rice in any way. It's not anything that was in Japan before the contact with the West. Okay.
No, it was actually created by a Norwegian American initially, and then it was bought out by local Japanese business or a corporation rather, and they brought in German brewers to kind of oversee the operation. So it's a German style lager.
I don't know if we've mentioned this before, but if you go to a Chinese restaurant, they offer Qingdao beer. And, it seems strange that there's a beer from China, but it's because when they split up China in terms of spheres of influence, Qingdao was the German protectorate. So
right,
they made
right,
some beer there. So
I believe it's actually made by Kirin.
that makes sense.
Let's
But
see.
do they import? Do they import the goods, or do they grow a little bit of
I
a little
imagine,
bit?
yeah, I imagine both China and Japan import most of their foodstuffs anyway.
Oh, that's probably true.
So I
Yeah.
would
I mean,
imagine
I know
they
that's
would.
true.
There's kind of a burgeoning craft beer industry in Japan where they're growing hops there and trying to use local ingredients as much as possible.
It seems like a very inoffensive kind of bland beer, like just a lager.
Mhm.
I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
really have terribly much to
it's
say
just
about it. I can see through it
it
very easily as I hold it to the light.
it tastes like a Coors or something like that. I mean, it's a just a decent kind of light German. Hold on,
Yeah,
let me
that's
just
pretty much
I
what it
gotta
tastes
get
like.
this out of my system real quick.
It's not as
Let's see.
offensive as like Bud Light or Coors Light or something like
Oh, I'm
that, but
sorry.
it's
I was thinking of not Tsingtao, but Ichiban Shibori is the one I
oh,
was
okay.
thinking of, not Tsingtao. My apologies. So they don't own Tsingtao. I
Oh.
guess it must be its own thing.
Speaking of owning things, wouldn't you think that William Gibson would have some kind of a claim on the word Matrix from having used
Yes.
it in this? And then there's a whole film called The Matrix. I wish I'd looked up whether there was
Well,
any conversation about that, but that seems to me like that'd be The
I don't.
Matrix TM.
Well, he didn't come up with the term. A matrix was used in computers. I mean, long time ago. So a matrix is a set of data. How you can arrange data,
Right.
right? And I think
Right.
that's used in mathematics. And so a matrix is really nothing
Yeah, it
new.
is. Yeah.
Cyber is the one that he owns sort of completely. And cyberspace is
Okay.
the one that he really owns. Because
Cyberspace, he definitely
yeah.
invented. I wonder about cyber, whether cyber is just that word, whether that word is
Hmm.
him. I kind of think because that's got a really strange Greek
Yeah.
derivation, if I
Yeah,
remember
you're probably
right. And
right. That probably existed
I
before
don't
him
know
for
whether he
sure.
came up with that.
Yeah, that probably existed well before. But cyberspace, we know that he owns that. What do you think is the appeal to this type of world? Because if you think about it, and we could ask the same for Blade Runner and all this stuff, what is the appeal to this dystopian, dark, tech-heavy sort of future? I mean, you're removing humanity, and you're removing, it seems, all the best of humanity. You don't see flowers growing, you don't see, babies, you don't see,
Right.
all the best things about humanity are pretty much removed somehow.
So
Sex becomes, a commodity and and transactional. We can be enhanced, perhaps, just like, but a car can be enhanced. You can put, a better carburetor on an engine and make it faster. And the same thing goes with people and stuff. So what is it about this type of gray, dark future that people find
so
appealing?
so there I think there's two functions to it. I think for some people dystopia is appealing. I
Mm-hmm.
sometimes get kind of depressed reading about dystopias. I don't enjoy that to a large extent.
Mm-hmm.
Like even now, I find myself every time I think about what's going on with AI in the world and everybody being on their phones all the time, and I kind of get a little despondent about the future sometimes. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
seem like someplace that I want to live or be a part of. But
Yeah.
I think some people just get a kick out of reading about like a bad future. Maybe some people there's a pessimistic bent to their personality that they think resonates with them when they read this. But the other thing about it is that and I'm taking it because I remember, like I said, there are cyberpunk role playing games. I played several of them when I was growing up, and I never really enjoyed being in those settings because they were depressing. They have a tendency to reflect the politics of the people. There's a lot of things like end stage capitalism and like the destruction of nation states and things like that that appeal to a certain kind of person, and it kind of rhymes with punk. It tends to be the same kind of people that enjoy punk to a large extent. There's an anarchist impulse in that I think people enjoy. But on a very simple level, whatever you think about the setting, it creates a really good environment for a story because there's chaos and there's like elements of it's an interesting setting to wander around. There's a lot of different elements. It's sort of like the Wild West would not have been a pleasant place to live in reality. That'd be a bad place to live, but it makes a
Right.
great
Yeah.
setting for a story because there's violence and adventure and a lot of things. The Middle Ages, same thing. Middle Age is not a great time to be alive, yet it
Well,
creates
I
a
was going to
really
say, yeah.
great
Right.
it creates a really great setting for a story. I think that's sort of what this is. I think this is similar. I think this creates a situation where, like in the Star Wars movies, there's like this chaotic civil war going on in the first part, and then that ends, and there's supposed to be this peaceful time. And what no, that's a pretty boring time to tell a story. So the first thing you have to do is topple that to have the next sequel trilogy. And there's not a lot of interest in the kinds of settings where it would actually be pleasant to live.
Sure.
And I think a cyberpunk future is very much one of those.
And in Star Wars, it's interesting because so Lucas gets around the problem of a set environment by having these different planets. And so you have Tatooine, which is like this outpost frontier planet where everything's dirty and dusty, and it's almost like being in the Wild West.
Right.
And then you have other planets which are all city and maybe where the Empire is, and you have like Cloud City and stuff like that. And so you have very high tech and very kind of out west. You have books like you mentioned, Lord of the Rings. Like, how often do those people shower? Right? Or bathe, I should say. You'd like to think often, but you never know. Maybe Gandalf had a trick. But in this type of world, it's pretty much all drab. Although free space.
But yeah, you're talking about the Spindle, the satellite city.
The satellite city.
There's also a lot of characters and terms and things in this book. Considering it's not even quite 300 pages long, there's a lot of things to keep track of. It would reward you read it slowly and being thoughtful about each of the people and places that come up in the book. And I think sort of having to read it at a fairly good pace was not helping my comprehension of a complicated setting and plot lines. Yeah. But yeah, there's this basically the floating city up in space, which I gather is like a gigantic disk, a gigantic version of the thing in 2001 that generates gravity by rotating.
Freeside.
There you go.
Yeah, Freeside. Yeah, it's supposed to be like a big kind of like Las Vegas type place that was all glitzy and glamour and stuff. And what's interesting is you have down on Earth everything's a sprawl, which reminds me of Judge Dredd. If you remember Judge Dredd, you have everything's called I think it's called the sprawl or something like that.
That term comes from the book that we did on the show a little while back that we had guest hosts for. That was Caves of Steel. That's the first place where anybody ever mentioned the sprawl, because that takes place hundreds of years in the future, where New York is like metastasized to most of the East Coast,
and that becomes again, that's a running theme in semi-dystopian future. I was even thinking Big Hero 6, that Disney movie, which is actually pretty good. It takes place in like San Francisco or something like that. It's
San Francisco or something like that.
Yeah, or something like that. Yeah, it's this big kind of hybrid Japanese sprawling place. And then you have, like I said, in the Dredd universe, the Judge Dredd universe, you have these huge sprawls. I think there was one from like New York to Washington, D.C. or something like that. And you have that on Earth, and everything else maybe is a wasteland. But then in space, so they escape in space and they go to Freeside. And it's this glitzy, glamorous type of place. But at the same time, it's just as raunchy and dirty as it is on Earth, right? You can get drugs everywhere. Death is still, actually, it's sometimes somehow worse in a lot of places. And that actually reminded me of The Fifth Element, sort of had that thing going where they had that.
Yeah, there's definitely some cyberpunk. Yeah, cyberpunk and Blade Runner is all over Fifth Element.
Yeah, for sure. Floston Paradise, which was that cruise ship kind of out in the middle of space that they went to, sort of the same type of concept.
I'm trying to remember the name of the books, and there's a show, you might have seen the show or read the books, I don't know, but there's a show where people are uploading their Altered Carbon. That's what I'm trying to think of. Do you know that one? It's this I think it's ended up being a series of books, but basically a lot of it is rich people have the ability to upload their consciousness and then put that consciousness into a new body, and that one is like 100% related to Neuromancer. There's definitely some that one's inspired by it, and that was pretty big. That was a show too, pretty successful show as well. So, and The Matrix, there's a lot of things that are inspired by William Gibson, I would think.
What's interesting is can we say that we're sort of marching that direction? I mean, Elon Musk has been working on this thing called Neuralink. Are you familiar with that?
I'm familiar with the idea of it. I think it's been about 10 years since I first read this, but they had a guy who I think he was paralyzed or something, and he could sit and play Space Invaders on a computer by being attached to the computer and get to like the third or fourth level of Space Invaders with his mind. And I'm assuming Neuralink is something like that.
Yeah, that's a lot of what it is. So Neuralink is an interface between you and technology, but it's implanted in your brain. It's a company that Elon Musk owns, spending a lot of money on R&D. And his first kind of idea is to help people whose backs have been severed or injured and they have loss of mobility. So to help them regain, mobility. He also says that humans will be able to interface with computers kind of without keyboards, without any other interface, just basically through the mind. And eventually that will be able to interface with each other. He kind of envisions this world where words are unnecessary, that we can speak to each other almost telepathically, but it would be through Neuralink, which is insane, right? But if you think about it, gosh, in 100 years, from 1900 to 2000, how far did we?
None of that seems unreasonable for like a long-term horizon projection, like 100 years. Like that seems about right. Like, yeah, exactly. I mean, we don't really know, like we said, when this is supposed to take place. It's asynchronous. The way like some of the things in this are exactly correct predictions of what would be possible in like the 2050s. And some things completely missed technological developments that happened 5 years after he wrote the book.
Cell phones.
Like cell phones. I mean, that's an obvious one.
That's a big one, yeah. Everybody missed those.
Because it's not even cell phones. I mean, cell phones are kind of a big deal. The really big deal is the smartphone and being able to access the internet like in the palm of your hand. I just don't think people could have conceived of that. I remember the first time I saw Wi-Fi, I think it was about 2003. And it was the first time I'd ever thought of such a thing being possible, much less the first time I'd seen it. Somebody was like, oh, you got to get a Wi-Fi card for your laptop to get on the internet. And I was like, you can get on the internet over like wirelessly? I was like, that's none of this cyberpunk stuff had that. Nobody thought of that. That just wasn't a thing. And I don't know why that was such a leap, why like nobody was talking about it.
Tesla envisioned a world where you could transmit data like through the air or something. But nobody really took Tesla seriously. Everybody thought he was kind of
Nikola Tesla, yeah.
Nikola Tesla,
He had a thing about transmitting energy through the air. That's what he wanted. He wanted to transmit electrical power without having actual cables. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe he might have had something like that. But it's
anyway.
That was one that caught me. That was literally in 1992 when I was reading about the future. I had no concept that such a thing would ever be. Not even 1998. I didn't think such a thing was going to be possible. And then there it was the next day. And then not long after they had that, you could suddenly get it over your phone.
Right.
And that happened fast. That happened.
Well, a lot of this stuff, sci-fi is it's all imagination, and there's a lot of hit or miss. I remember one of the War of the Worlds, for example, the famous example is Wells thought of lasers, for example, because the Martians had these heat beams that would shoot out and they would hit somebody and then they would just kind of burst into flames and stuff. And everybody said, oh, that's a laser. And he was like prophesizing a laser. And just the idea of these huge tripods that they controlled from inside and walk around. So, but I mean, you have to make up something, right? You have to use your imagination, create something. And it's hard maybe to get it all. Fahrenheit 451 didn't come up with anything. There was no new technology in there.
No.
They were using kerosene and matches to burn stuff.
No.
So
that might as well have been the 1950s. I can't even remember whether there was anything. Was there anything in it that was actually futuristic technology? I don't
know. Other than, a lot of nuclear bombs at the end, but
yeah, but he was writing at a time where that was the thing. He was just kind of magnifying the 1950s by a few years and imagining.
I mean, they still had cars. The cars went really fast, but they still had cars. Oh, there was the robot dog. That's right. There was a robot dog, which I guess we could say is the Google dog that they're starting. Oh, in fact, I think New York has deployed the robot dog, haven't they?
No, I haven't been bitten by one yet.
Well, I think they have. I'm gonna look this up just to stuff for nightmares.
I have seen robots on the streets, but I saw robots on the street. There were robots on the campus at George Mason, I think before I moved away to New Mexico. So like 8 or 9 years ago was the first time I saw a robot puttering around the campus. I don't know.
New York Police Department has acquired semi-autonomous robotic canines. They've deployed those Google robot dog things in New York City, and they'll be using them for. Let's see, they'll have autonomous capabilities, which is scary. So they'll be patrolling by themselves. They'll be deployed in specific instances, bomb squad robots.
They're not going to be patrolling
Right.
the street, biting people that rob liquor stores.
For the time being, give them some time. They'll be on the subways with you, which maybe is needed. But in any case, yeah. So I
Yeah,
mean, that was, I guess we could say, Bradbury, ushered in the robot dog, but at the same time,
yeah,
he was still using kerosene to light stuff on fire with matches.
right.
You know,
And
whatever.
and everybody has books. The only way to get information
Yeah.
is books. Yeah, back to this one though. There's a lot of stuff that's way ahead of where we are. Like the biotechnology is not where he's predicting. But the internet seems, the matrix seems very, I don't know how to describe it. It seems wrong. You go into it and you try to access data with
Mhm.
a sort of avatar that you walk up to these geometric things and you try to access data that way
Yeah.
physically. I guess what I'm wondering about it is, what is the point of having your brain so connected? I mean, then they can defend it with these, black ice intrusion countermeasures that can like fry your brain and stuff. So why not
Yeah.
use the internet without having that? Why make yourself vulnerable to such a thing? What's the purpose of that? It's cool. It's definitely
Yeah.
cool, but
Are you familiar with, is it Second Life? Was that the name of
I've heard
the
of it. I've heard of it. Yeah.
virtual world? So it sort of always reminded me of that. And Second Life, which was created before like Oculus or any of the, or Meta or any of the other kind of like virtual world stuff, or virtual reality
Uh-huh.
stuff, you would access Second Life through a terminal. So
Mhm.
you're looking at supposedly this new world. And it was a virtual world and you had an avatar and you could do things like buy property, you could buy brands, you could open stores, you could sell stuff in there and like sell digital
Mhm.
products, and the digital products you could make in there. It was
Yeah.
kind of insane. And I mean, arguably Minecraft, you could do the same thing in Minecraft in the shared servers, But the next step was the putting on the virtual glasses. So now you're in that world, right? You're not
Uh-huh.
controlling it with a keyboard and mouse. You're in it, you're seeing it, you're kind of, it's all around you. So there's that part. And then sort of he jacks into it, right? So he connects it with his plug into his spinal cord, which is
Mhm.
exactly what the Matrix does. And if you think about
Yeah, that's right.
sensory, if you think about senses, they're simply chemical reactions. That's all they are. I was thinking about that earlier today, that everything is a chemical reaction. If you hug somebody, you get a chemical
Oh yeah.
reaction.
Yep.
That's why it's pleasant. If you taste something, it's a chemical reaction and you like it or you don't like it, right?
Yeah.
And so if by plugging into your spinal cord, which is, where all your nerves and so forth are, and it can mimic all of that, then there is no
Mhm.
difference. That's what the whole point of the Matrix was. There's no difference
Yeah,
between
no,
that and
absolutely.
reality, right?
I get why you'd
Um,
want to do that, like as an escapist thing, right? Like
yes,
that, I
yes,
totally understand that. That virtual
yes.
reality that was perfect like that, that would be, people wouldn't do anything else. They just stay in their rooms and do that. But
Hmm.
why
Hmm.
would you be accessing data for like commercial and military and other purposes that way, in a way that makes it so dangerous? Like why? It doesn't make a lot of.
Well, I think
Why do
it
you need
was
to
a
be
he was a
physically in there?
well, he was a hacker, and I think it had something to do with. I think he was envisioning the internet as a literally a matrix, like a three-dimensional matrix,
Yeah,
like
like a
Tron.
space you can move around. Yeah.
Gosh, when did Tron come out? Tron must have been 1981. I didn't even think about
It
that.
it might have been 82. It's right around the same time.
I mean, Tron was super early, but
I
Tron,
think Tron was one of those things that, well, first of all, the movie itself, like the plot of the movie was kind of meh, but I think it also
yeah,
just went over everybody's head. Like I think it's just too much for people in 1981 or 82 or whatever that was.
yeah. So that was
So it
82.
just
Yeah,
wasn't.
but the whole idea of Tron was that there's a world inside the computer, right? It's
Uh-huh.
the
Yeah.
computer world, and it's a three-dimensional type of thing that if you access it, then you see the computer programs as things, not just
Mhm.
programs, right? And that idea is, I mean, even you could say that Wreck-It Ralph is sort of the same thing.
Yeah.
These programs are things and they do things and
Right.
they interact and so forth. And so I think that's what he's sort of envisioning the internet as, or the cyberspace as, right? It's this
Right.
connected world.
It's
If you
almost like
access it,
a misunderstanding of how the internet would work, or like over analogizing. Like if you picture the internet as connected
yeah,
nodes, that therefore it makes sense to go in there and walk around between the nodes and do things. And it's like that doesn't really.
over analogizing.
Yeah, you're like thinking of
I've
it.
never heard of that.
You're
But I
thinking
think
of it
it's
as like you're
that's
like
a
here's one server that's at one place and
yes,
another server at another, and they're connected in the internet,
yeah, yeah,
by programs and by
uh-huh,
pathways and stuff. And so therefore, like that old guy saying that the internet's a series of tubes. It's like you're
yeah.
picturing it that way, but that isn't really what it is
Well,
or
no,
how it
I
functions
think
or how it needs to
I
function
mentioned
anyway.
I mentioned Wreck-It Ralph, and I think that's the best analogy. Like he had, like you would travel through
Yeah, it's similar. Yeah.
the plugs from one arcade to the other, arcade game to the other. You
Right.
travel through the plugs, and you go from Cubert
Hmm.
to whatever it was, right? There was like a central clearinghouse, and in the second one, they go into the internet and they find like
Right.
this guy's like a scammer, and they hired a scammer to do this stuff for him. And I think that's how Gibson was thinking about it. Like, okay, here's the computer program and stuff, but there are like some bugs
Hmm.
in that program that are like shadowy guys that maybe we can get to do this or that or something. I don't know. It's an
Yeah.
interesting way to think about it. He's thinking about it as an entirely different universe, essentially, which is maybe the point, and maybe it is. Who's to say, right? Especially
Right.
with artificial intelligence, who's to say that we live in a real world and that's not, which I guess is what they want us to kind of question and think about. Starts hurting my head after a while.
Yeah, a little bit. A little bit. It's a little confusing. And there's some questions about consciousness and things like that in this book. I thought one of the coolest ideas is towards the end when he's talking to the AI, and the AI tells him that it found in the signals detected
Yes.
by SETI back in the 70s another AI
Yeah.
sending signals from the Centauri system. And I was like, okay,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
pretty cool. I like that idea.
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
if that makes any sense, but I like that idea that only the
Well,
AI could pull out the signal. It could analyze the signal at such a high level that it could pull out what was probably an intelligent signal coming from somewhere else. I
right.
thought that was
But
a
the
neat
implication,
throwaway.
what is the implication of that?
To
The
me, the
implication of that,
implication is that there must have been a planet with another intelligent species on it in the Centauri system that put together an internet, created an AI, and now that AI is able to was sending a message to Earth that only this AI in the 21st century can pick up on.
so
Maybe
that
it's
means
implying
that,
something else, but that was what.
well, I think, that means that the AI is the supreme being. First of all, we are no longer useful, right? They don't need us. And that the if the AIs are talking to each other and finding other AIs, what are we? Like
Hmm.
that's a different life form at that point, right? Kind of redefining
Yeah,
what
I
life
guess so.
is, what it means, our place in the universe. I think
There's a lot of questions.
Case is the protagonist. I think Case asks Wintermute, who's the AI. Once AI and Neuromancer, who's the other AI, once they merge, I think Case asks it if it is God. Like, are you God now? I can't
Uh-huh.
remember what it says. It was a complicated answer. Like, I'm
Yeah.
reality or something like that.
It was making me
I don't know,
envision
but
a future where you've got an AI that has developed to the
mhm,
point where it could just sort of masquerade as God to people. Like it could just tell
right,
everybody it's a God and it can do everything, and it could definitely exist that way. And then I was thinking, what
yeah,
if there were more than one? Then you'd have like lots of gods competing with each
yeah,
other, sending mixed messages to humanity about what they
right,
want. I was
right,
imagining a world like that. I was
yeah,
thinking, oh, I know somebody's done that before. I know I'm not the first to think
sure,
along
sure.
those lines, but it was kind of a cool idea. That was the one part of the book that kind of set me off on like imagining something I never really thought about before. Some of the reflections
Yeah,
on AI, and obviously those are pretty germane right now because we've got Chat GPT
right.
really sort of showing people that it pretty much is past. Are people saying it's pretty much passing the Turing test, right? You can't tell you're talking to a computer when you're
Right.
talking to it, or not really
Correct.
anyway. Not unless somebody told you
Yeah.
that. You might think there was something wrong with the person you're talking to, but you wouldn't
Hmm.
think it was a
Hmm.
robot necessarily. So,
And there's some people
well, are we?
that discount it completely. There's a physicist, Michio Kaku. Are you familiar with him? He's that Japanese physicist with
Yeah.
the white, kind of white,
Mhm.
cool looking
With the
white hair
crazy hair, yeah.
and stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he dismisses AI. He's like, all it does is repeat what other people have said. That's all it does. It's no big deal.
My objection to that argument is this: all I am is an intelligence that repeats a bunch of stuff that other people have said to me.
You've
That's what I
learned,
do.
right?
I've been taking in
Yeah,
words
yeah,
ever since I was born and ideas. I'm
sure.
reformulating them in
Yeah,
my head, coming up with new utterances.
yeah,
There's some software that I came wired with, basically. Or sorry, there's some hardware
yeah.
I have. And I think you do actually start life with some software, some programs that are up running for like how to learn language and things like that. But that's all I am, is just a bunch of facts that have been put together into like a new personality. I don't see how that's
Right.
different from AI. except in question of degree, like how much of it is happening. And in one way, the
Well,
AI is better, right? It has access to a heck of a lot more information than I do. But in another ways, it's worse,
consider this though. In 2016, a Google AI, it was a neural machine translation AI. In 2016, invented its own language without prompting, without the programmers telling it to do it, without any help whatsoever. And the programmers found these, and the way they found it was they found these commands that they had never seen before. And they're like, what does this mean? And so they were quizzing the AI about it. What is this? And it's, well, it was faster. I figured it was faster if I did it this way. So it invented its own language to essentially talk to itself, to give itself commands. And they shut it down because they got scared. They're like, holy crap, cow, this thing's,
Yeah.
when it can do that, that's doing more than, that's not just repeating what other people say. That's literally learning and creating and doing new stuff, right? And that was in
Well, it's sort of, I guess what I'm saying is it's like even when a human being creates something new, it's kind of like what we said about some of these works of imaginative fiction are like recompiling and spitting out committing something. I think that's what you're always doing when you do something creative, is you're always putting together some things you saw before and putting a different spin on it. Like there's no magic in the process, I guess is what I'm saying. It's the computer is going to do the same thing. It might not be as good at it yet, but there's no reason to think it shouldn't be able to do that. It's interesting. I actually haven't even done that. I haven't gone and interacted with ChatGPT yet. I should probably try that. We'll see.
It's interesting.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Well, anyway, so let's talk about what were our biggest surprises in Neuromancer. What was yours?
It's hard to say because I've read this before. I guess, the one that was a big surprise to me back then. First time, because I read this in the 90s. And my biggest surprise back then, sort of still my biggest surprise, was the use of Microsoft. And it was sort of a throwaway.
I thought that was funny.
He didn't really focus on it. But Microsoft was this way to implant technology into your brain, I think. That's sort of what it was. So this is 84, but I think Bill Gates's Microsoft was like 82 or something.
I think so. Yeah, I think the company. No, I think Microsoft might go back to like 1979.
Yeah, I think not? That it might. I mean, but it was always interesting to me that this was.
I was thinking he might have just come up with the term independently, because I was thinking he might have just was thinking software, but it's really, really small, so it can go into your body. Right. So it's a Microsoft, which obviously today we would call nanosoft. If you're talking about something small in somebody's body, it wouldn't be on the micro scale, but
micro is not small enough.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I want to say the micro scale is like where you can see a human hair. Like a human hair is micros wide. And if you want to be in cells and inside your body, you're going to have to be at the nanoscale, but I don't know.
Right.
So it's just the use of that term. Yeah, I made a little note about that. I was curious whether that was a nod to Microsoft, the company. I don't know how prominent that would have been in people's head at that time. I think that was a really new company and not one with much profile in 1984.
I don't even think DOS came out until like 85 or 86. So it was after the book was published, but I don't think there's any connection between them. But
yeah, that's interesting. So mine was the connection between the title of the book, Neuromancer. I thought was just like appealing, was applying to sort of mancy is like magic. Neuromancy would be the magic of using your brain and your nervous system, and sort of a reference to being on the internet, which is kind of what it is. I was in a way, and I just thought the Neuromancer was the main character. That was because that was his job. It probably is him to some extent, but I was surprised when it turned out to be the child AI that was in there, who I think is essentially the kid that he talks to when he the kid that helps him bend spoons and things, is probably kind of patterned on the Neuromancer from this book.
Yeah.
And also the double entendre, again, I guess the triple entendre of new romance with Neuromance, which is very much like a punk idea of like living in the modern world, embracing the technology on one hand, but also rejecting it and appealing to like older roots and more deeply human things, and the conflict between technology and humanity. And so I was like, that's actually a really cool part of the name. I like that a lot. New romance. And that's kind of a nod to that. I don't know if that was intentional on the part of the author, but definitely thought it was cool. And then I had a little extra, and this is like kind of changed my life surprise, was he makes an offhand reference to something called sanpaku. Did you catch that? When
Mm-mm.
he's talking about his girlfriend and her eyes and how she has sanpaku. So I was like, oh,
Mm-mm.
what is that? So I went and looked it up, and it's if you can see the white of your eye above the iris or below the iris, it's a
Mm-hmm.
condition called sanpaku. And Japanese people think it means that you have like a curse, like sort of a cursed destiny, or you're a drug user, or you're some sort of tragedy hovers over you. And my
Mm-hmm.
first thought when I read that, I was thinking, you can't see the white of people's eyes. I went through the pictures on my phone and looked at the photographs of people. You can't.
Hmm.
People's eyes, for the most part,
The
you can't see the
eyelids.
whites below or
Yeah.
above the iris. I was really
Interesting.
surprised by that. If I drew a
Interesting.
person, I think I would have drawn a person mostly with showing the whites of their eyes.
Right.
I just thought that was very surprising that I didn't notice a basic fact about the human
What
face.
what a weird obscure thing.
Yeah,
Wow.
I thought that was,
I think that takes the cake for the most obscure surprise.
yeah,
I
probably.
want to talk real quick. I know we're past it almost, but I do want to talk about the difference between Wintermute, which is the AI who hires him, and
Right.
Neuromancer. And so
Uh-huh.
Wintermute's objective is to pair with Neuromancer and become one entity and become a supreme intelligence. Okay. Wintermute is, I mean, the difference between them, but it's there. So they have this kid, a child represents Neuromancer, right?
Mhm.
And Wintermute is represented by all these people that Case knows, and
Okay.
he kills half the time. But these grown-ups
Right.
that he knows, kind of that he's known and talked to, that he's comfortable and familiar with. But there's this kid who's really unsettling. He's like an 8-year-old boy. In every sci-fi kind of movie that I've ever seen with a little boy, yeah, like an Akira or something, it's always weird. This little boy
Right.
means some type of disaster is imminent, right? It's always used.
Red
It's
rum.
yeah, always used as some like has no
Yeah.
conscience. Will I'm thinking of like the kid in Pet Cemetery. There's no,
Damien.
yeah, Damien, right? And so it's used as a very specific mythical creature, perhaps.
Hmm.
And I
Yep.
think Neuromancer is described at one point as being a demon. Like he's a demon is what he
Yeah.
is. He's described as, right?
Yeah.
And if you think about it, it's really weird. I mean, the interplay with Neuromancer is trying to get Case to stay there, or tempting
Hmm.
Case to stay here. Why? Why would you go back to that? Just stay here.
Right.
You'll have, might as well. It's almost like Neuromancer's creepy, very creepy type of thing. Wintermute seems to have a very logical, like, idea about who it is, what it is, and what it wants to do. And
Right.
Neuromancer seems to have no conscience, no moral compass, just pure well, I don't even know about logic. Well, I guess it would be ultimate logic, right?
And
Um,
then they link up into one AI super being at the end, basically.
right. And you don't really get a sense of what's going to happen, right?
No, I don't know I don't know what's happening with that.
They contact Case and say, you're cured, you've got a lot of money, thanks for helping us, and we've
Hmm.
linked up with this AI from Alpha Centauri, and things are good. And
Uh-huh.
that's it. And it's like, what's going to happen now? Which is a great way to
Right.
send off the end of the book. So anyway,
Which it's apparently
um,
it's a trilogy, and I didn't even realize that. There are other books
right.
that follow on from this one.
Well,
Something about the
so
Jamaicans in space really seemed familiar to me, and I was trying to remember if I'd read this before or whether I don't know. But yeah, the Rastafarians in
not
space.
Jamaicans, Rastafarians.
Maybe
Speaking
they're.
in is it speaking in dub or singing in dub or whatever?
Oh, I really just wish authors would never use dialect in their writing. That was driving
I
me
know,
crazy. Like,
I know. It's
anyway,
tough. That's tough.
especially when they're not speakers of that dialect. So I'm kind of questionable about what the people. I'm
Right.
like, that's not how Jamaicans really talk.
That
So
would be
anyway, what's
difficult.
your vote? What do you say about the classicity of this one? What do you think? Are you
I
toasting?
have to I have to vote it a classic. I mean, this is
Oh, okay. All
Neuromancer
right.
is I'm not saying all of Gibson's work. This is his premiere. Everything else was
This
a
is his
sophomore
big
work. Yeah,
thing.
it's
Yeah.
right out the gate. I don't know if people expected big things from him. I don't think he ever lived up to this. This is what he's known for. And he's written novels up until I think his last one was published in 2020 or something. And I'm like,
And
really?
I hate to extend things anymore, but did want to mention one thing is that he was commissioned to write this book and
Hmm.
put under a year long contract to
Yeah,
get the book
contract.
done,
Yeah,
which he
yeah,
said really stressed him out and put
yeah,
the screws to him to get it done. And I was thinking that's a good thing. That's probably I
yeah,
would
for
love
sure,
that. I would love
for
if somebody
sure.
was just like, you have a
Well,
year to write this book,
and
and you're
everything
going to
he'd
be
written before
embarrassed if
this,
it's crap.
everything was short stories before this. He didn't think he had a novel in him.
Hmm.
and he reused stuff from previous short stories, and he kind of so he
Hmm.
created this universe thing and made that kind of an
Right.
expanded universe, as Marvel calls it. But
Yeah. And that's why
yeah,
the
so I
Blade
mean,
Runner thing was so upsetting to him, because he was in the middle of writing the darn book and he
yeah.
was like, "Oh no, they're gonna think I
Oh
just watched
no, yeah,
Blade
yeah,
Runner
right,
and ripped it off."
exactly.
So,
But I'm not saying all of Gibson's work. He's and it's not saying that he hasn't had good stuff. I watched one of my favorite episodes of X Files was one that he wrote, for example.
oh,
But I mean,
interesting.
so he's written a lot of really good stuff. But this was his work, right? And it was
Mhm.
because I
Yeah.
think it ushered in the genre of cyberpunk. It created kind of a new way to talk about technology and the future, and created
Yep.
new terms, a new way to think about it, especially when
Hmm.
it came to human kind of technology hybrids. Thinking about what does it mean to be human in this time, which it goes
Yep.
beyond, do Android dream of electric sheep or whatever it is. Some of
Hmm.
the stuff that had come before him. So yeah, I think absolutely it's
Right.
a classic. I mean, 6.5 million
Okay.
copies can't be wrong. So here, I'm going to
Yeah.
toast
No, and
this
I mean, I
so you
think
can
it
hear
just
this.
basically created a genre. I think you gotta, yeah. I don't know if that was audible, but I gave a little toast.
Okay.
So, I think that's it for this week, right?
That is it for this week. I haven't picked out the movie yet. Free,
It'll be movie
it'll be
movie
movie.
and
Okay.
then free choice for Dave McArthur, toasting the classics. Bye, everybody.
And for Clint Lanier, don't forget to pick up my book. Available now on Amazon, every place you find finer books. It's called Ted Mack and America's First Black-Owned Brewery: The Rise and Fall of People's Beer. And for Toasting the Classics. Out. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.
That's it for episode 77 of Toasting the Classics. For those playing along at home, get some vodka and Kahlua to make Black Russians for our discussion of 1982's 48 Hours. If you'd like to get in touch, please send us an email at toastingtheclassics@gmail.com. Send us show ideas, comments, complaints, and let us know if you are really a demon AI plotting world domination. We, for one, welcome our new superhuman overlords. Check out my blog at theattractivenuisance.com and follow us on Twitter at @ractivenuisance. Our music was written by Michelle McArthur. See you next time on Toasting the Classics.